All right, chapter 9 deals with George Washington taking office, and then it's going to go into Adams and Jefferson and some of the early administration. But I really want to talk just for a second about Washington taking office. And he was inaugurated, which means, he takes the ceremony, or is the ceremony where he takes the oath of office. And this happened in New York City on April the 30th, 1789. Yes, New York City, because if you remember, that is where the first capital is going to be located. Washington, D.C. hasn't, or a capital city hasn't even been discussed yet. Well, it's been discussed, but it certainly has not been decided upon. The thing I want to talk about, though, is what do we call this new guy, this new chief executive? There are many people that said, is he like a king? Is he like an emperor? What should we call him? Some people favored, a simple title like President Washington. But others, John Adams in particular, who is the Vice President of the United States, he offers a dignified title. Now get this one. He suggests that Washington be called His Highness the President of the United States and Protector of the Rights of the Same. Wow. Can you imagine that? President Barack Obama, His Highness the President of the United States and the Protector of the Rights of the Same, Obama. Nah, it's crazy. Washington, though, says, no, listen, guys. President Washington is just fine. And that kind of sets an example, or a precedent. A precedent sets examples for others to follow. He could have demanded a glorious title, but he doesn't. All right? Washington also sets many precedents that many presidents are going to follow. Being that he's the first, they look to Washington as the guy who sets the example for what presidents should do. Okay, so let's talk about this inauguration. Inauguration, again, is the ceremony where the president takes the oath of office. It happened on April the 30th, 1799. And some of the witnesses who were there said that, the Washington looked grave, almost to sadness. Now, can you imagine? Here's a guy, he's been a war hero. He has defeated the British Empire in the Revolutionary War, and now he is the first chief executive. And I'm sure this burden is great. Everybody is looking to him. How is he going to lead this nation? And believe me, this country has got a lot of problems. It owes a lot of money. It doesn't have a strong military. It has no navy to speak of. This has got a lot of problems. Now, Washington is in charge of this. So instead of this being a joyous, happy, yes, I'm the President of the United States, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm the President of the United States. What am I going to do now? One of the most important precedents Washington set up was the fact that, he ran for 2 terms. 2 terms. There was nothing in the Constitution that said that there was a time limit or a term limit on the president. He was extremely popular. He could have run for as many terms as he wants. But he says 2 terms is enough for any man. And every president until 1940, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, followed this example. No president ever served more than 2 terms. They looked to Washington and said, hey, if it's good enough for Washington, then I'm certainly not better than Washington. And they stepped down after 2 terms. FDR changes that in 1940. He runs for a 3rd and then a 4th term. All right. Then they changed the Constitution to change that and did set a term limit of 2 terms. But the other very important precedent that the President Washington sets is he named well-known, talented leaders to head the government departments, which is his cabinet. Now, the Constitution doesn't really give a lot of information on how the executive branch should be set up. But he knew, Washington's smart enough to know, that he needs talented, educated people in his cabinet. Okay, so the Washington's very first cabinet, and man, this is an all-star cast. I can't imagine another cabinet that's come close to these guys. Okay, the Constitution, again, doesn't really say that there can be a cabinet. It doesn't say it can be a cabinet. So Washington sets up a cabinet, which are his advisors. They advise him on things and then run these departments. Now, first there were 5 departments. There was Department of State, Treasury, War, Attorney General, and Postmaster General. That was it. That was the executive branch. There's 5. Today we have 15, just FYI. But 5 to begin with. Okay, so let's talk about some of these guys. That's Secretary of State. That's the guy who's going to handle our international affairs, is Thomas Jefferson. Good old TJ. All right? You know, the guy that authored the Declaration of Independence, ambassador to France. Brilliant man. Okay? At Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, who is a genius. A genius. But he and TJ are going to have a lot of disagreements. All right? But Washington keeps them both. He doesn't look for a bunch of people who are going to necessarily agree with each other, but he wants people who's going to give him the best advice. All right. Secretary of War is Henry Knox. Fort Knox, where they store all the gold in Kentucky, is named after him. And by the way, Secretary of War gets changed to Secretary of Defense after World War II. Another interesting tidbit. And finally, the Attorney General is Edmund Randolph. All right? And I don't recall who the Postmaster General was, but he was somebody probably important as well. But these four guys, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, Henry Knox, and Edmund Randolph, are really all-stars, and it's the very first cabinet. All right, so the Constitution calls for a Supreme Court, but it leaves it up to Congress, the legislative branch, to set up the court system. So in 1789, they passed the Judiciary Act, and they set up the Supreme Court with one Chief Justice, and that's John Jay. I'll write that down here. John Jay is the Chief Justice, and 5 Associate Justices. So 1 plus 5 equals 6. 6. I have no idea why they'd picked 6. What if it's a 3-3 tie? I don't know. Today we have 9. So, if there's any kind of split, it'll always go 5-4 or 6-3 or something like that. There won't be a tie. I'm not sure exactly why they said it initially with 6, because to me that's going to beg for problems. John Jay, it was right there, is the first Chief Justice. And Congress sets up districts and circuit courts. And these district and circuit courts, people are going to bring their cases to these. And the Supreme Court, if it needs to, will hear cases that go to the district and circuit court, and they make the final decision. Remember, Supreme Court bases all their decisions on the Constitution, and whatever the Supreme Court says goes. They are the final word. All right? So that's the Judiciary Act of 1789. This is going to come into play later under John Adams' administration. So remember that. The Judiciary Act of 1789. Okay, let's talk about probably the biggest problem facing our new fledgling country, the United States. The U.S. had a large national debt. It owed about $77 million. Okay? $77 million. It cost the government a little over $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.3 million a year to run the government. It was only bringing in $1 million to $1.3 million a year. How in the world are they going to pay off $77 million? And here's the real rub. States had borrowed money. The federal government had borrowed money because they have to fight this war. They have to pay for supplies. They have to pay the soldiers. They have lots of things that they need to buy to fight a war. Now, what they did is they issued bonds, just like we do today. A bond is a certificate that promises to repay the amount of money loaned plus interest on a certain date. Okay, so if you borrowed $100, or you loaned $100, the government would issue a bond, and you would be able to cash that bond in for $100 plus the interest by a certain date. That's how we do it today. All right. Now, remember, states had borrowed money, so all 13 states had borrowed money, plus the federal government had borrowed money. Now, Hamilton, who is the Secretary of the Treasury, comes up with a plan. And Hamilton's plan is to pay off the debt in full. He says that we will take on all the states' debts. Massachusetts, how much do you owe? Okay, give it to us. South Carolina, North Carolina, New Hampshire, New York, Pennsylvania, give us your debt, and we, the federal government, will pay it off. Wow. Now, why would he do that? Because he knows that the federal government it's this United States of America. If anybody's ever going to loan us any more money, if anybody's ever going to trust us, we have to pay off this money. Okay? But there's going to be a couple problems with this. All right? Here they are. People in the South, especially James Madison. James Madison's from Virginia. He is going to be our 4th president. Okay? They oppose this plan. Why? For 2 reasons. Number 1, most of the southern states had already paid off all their debt. They had paid it off. And now they look at these northern states and say, are you kidding me? We paid off our debt. Now you're going to take their debt and you're going to pay that off and they don't have to pay it? So to them, it looks like the federal government is favoring the North. The South had already paid back the money they owed, but not the North. The North's not going to have to. That'd be like me going up to 2 of my students and say, hey, I know you owe me $10. I want it. And the kid gives me his $10. Then I go to the other student and say, don't worry about it. You're forgiven. You don't have to pay it. How would that student feel? That student would feel cheated or unfairly treated. And that's what the South feels. The other problem is that many of these people who had been issued bonds, storekeepers, soldiers, individuals who had sold the government items, had taken these bonds and sold them to speculators. Speculator is someone who says, hey, I know you need money. I know you're about ready to lose your business. So here's what I'm going to do. You have a $10 bond there. I'm going to give you cash for that bond. And the person is like, yes, thank God, because I was really getting desperate. All right, here's my $10 bond. And the guy goes, I'll give you $1. $1, but it's worth $10. Well, I'm sorry. Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. Do you want the money, cash in hand? Or do you want to wait and see if the federal government is going to eventually pay that off? So many of these people reluctantly sold the bonds to speculators for pennies on the dollar. Okay? So Madison says, hey, listen, if you pay back those people that have those bonds now, they're going to get rich, rich, rich. They cheated people. But Hamilton says, listen, I know that some people have been speculating, and I understand that, and it's unfortunate. But we as a nation have got to be trusted to pay off our loans. So he basically convinces Congress to support the plan. But now he's got to convince the South. And how does he do that? He proposed that the nation's capital, the new nation's capital, would be in the South. In the South. Now, the South is all for that, because they figure if the nation's capital is in the South, they're going to have a lot more influence on the goings-on in the nation's capital. So they reluctantly agree to Hamilton's plan, and so now all the individual and state debt has been absorbed by the federal government, who is going to pay off all of the debt. Okay? People still aren't too happy, though. Okay, so the national debt has been taken care of. Remember, they agreed to Hamilton's plan, and they're going to build the new capital city in the South. By the way, the nation's capital has again moved from New York City to Philadelphia, while the new capital is going to be built. And it's going to be built on land on the Potomac River between Maryland and Virginia. Okay, all right, so Hamilton's other plan is to build the economy. And again, this is going to meet a lot of resistance as well. The first thing he wants to do is create a Bank of the United States. Bank of the United States. Well, first of all, a lot of people go, hold it. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that you can have a Bank of the United States. That's not constitutional. Well, he argues that there needs to be a place that we can deposit our tax, the money that we receive in taxes, and to issue loans. He thinks it's a good economic idea. So the Bank of the United States is established in 1791, and again, the government is going to take the money it receives from taxes and puts it in the bank. And the bank is going to issue money to pay the loans, or pay back the money that they have been loaned, and also to make loans to businesses and farmers. All right. this is going to help spur economic growth. His other plan, though, is to put a tariff, which is a tax on foreign goods. England is way ahead of the United States at this time in producing quality manufactured goods. So a lot of people are buying things from England, especially the people in the South. There's hardly any manufacturing in the South. The South is primarily agriculture. In the North is where the factories are. Now the people in the North are like, oh yeah, we love this. Tax them. Put a high tax on that foreign good because, if I build a plow in Massachusetts, right, I probably can't make it as cheap as they can in England. Back in England, a lot of the factories have been paid off. A lot of the machinery they used to make the plow has been paid off. But in the United States, manufacturing is still new, and the cost to produce that plow is more expensive in the United States than it is in England. So what do people do? They follow their wallet. They start buying the cheaper plow from England. Hamilton says, let's put a super high tax on imported goods, goods that are being brought into our country. That'll make American goods cheaper to the local people. It's still going to cost them more than it did before, but it's going to help the American government. Now, the people in the North love it. Yay for Hamilton, right? Because we're manufacturers. We want people to buy our stuff. So they're in favor of this. But people in the South hate this. They have to import, their goods because they don't manufacture anything. So the plow that used to cost them, $8, $8 from England is now going to cost them, maybe $10 or $12. Now they can buy one from a manufacturer in New England for $10, but it still cost them more than it did before. So once again, they see the federal government favoring the North. The North did not have to pay off their debts, and now it looks to them like the federal government is putting an economic system in place that favors the North at the expense of the South. Well, Congress goes ahead and passes this tariff. It's going to be lower than what Hamilton initially wanted, but they do pass the tariff. Okay? So you're already starting to see a little bit of a problem between the North and the South, don't you? All right. Okay, one other way that Congress decided to raise money is for Congress to pass a tax on liquor. Okay? So any liquor that's being manufactured in the United States, they're going to put a tax on. But now this is really, really going to upset farmers. Okay? Because many farmers had grown corn out in the western part of the United States, western Pennsylvania, in those states. And it was easier for them to convert the corn into whiskey and transport it than it was to load up the bushels of corn into, a wagon train and haul them back to the east. Because remember, there's very few roads. So if you grow a bunch of corn and you take all the corn off the cob, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be large. It's going to be big. And now to haul all that stuff to the east is time consuming, and it's not as profitable as it is to take that corn and distill it into whiskey. In fact, George Washington was the biggest distiller of whiskey in the United States. But then again, he can probably afford to pay the tax. All right, so backcountry farmers hated this because they were able to take that corn, distill it into whiskey, load it on barges, sail it down rivers. It was much easier for them, and they made more money taking their corn and turning it into whiskey than just by selling the corn. So they hated this tax, and some refused to pay it. They even start arguing that this is much like some of the taxes the British had imposed on the colonies. Right? Now what's the difference? We didn't have representation in Parliament. We do have representation in the Congress. Okay? So this tax has been passed by the representatives in the legislature, and the president has signed it. So, they really can't use that argument. They do have representation. But they protest. They march to the city of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, and guess what they start doing? They start tarring and feathering tax collectors. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, Washington responds immediately. He calls the militia to put it down. He actually goes there. And once these protesters heard that the militia's coming, they fled back to their, to their farms. Now Hamilton, who is a hothead, wants the leaders of the protest to be hanged for treason. But Washington makes a very wise move. He says, no. I have showed the strength. I have showed that the United States government is not going to tolerate protests, but I'm going to show some mercy. And he pardons the leaders of this protest, which I think does a lot more to say, hey, you know something, we do have representation. Washington is being fair. Okay? So the Whiskey Rebellion is put down pretty quickly. Washington uses his wisdom, and instead of executing, those protesters, he pardons them, and a lot of those people that were protesters start to go, you know something, this guy's pretty good. He's a good president. All right? But it does show that the government will not tolerate violence from those who disagreed with it. So Washington is able to put down the rebellion, show the strength of the government, and show mercy at the same time. There you go, the Whiskey Rebellion.